Sign the paper, or those two old men lose everything, and it'll be your fault." Richard Whitmore threw the $100,000 onto the garage floor at Nathan's feet, cash spilling across the grease-stained concrete. "Every honest man has a price mechanic. This is yours. Admit the marriage is fake, and I'll save your father's garage forever. Refuse, and I'll take it all her company, your shop, those old men's jobs. What's your dignity worth now?" Nathan stared at the money that could end all his problems tonight, and what he did next left the richest man in the room speechless. Before we go on, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. He got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and he made his way down that enormous staircase into a kitchen the size of his whole shop, and he found the cook, a heavy-set woman named Rosa, already there staring at him like he'd wandered in off the street. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in a tone that made it clear she'd rather he vanish. "Just looking for coffee," Nathan said. "I can make it myself if you point me at the machine." Rosa's eyebrows went up half an inch. "You want to make your own coffee?" "I've been making my own coffee since I was 10, ma'am. No reason to stop now." He found the pot, found the grounds, and set about it with the easy competence of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. And Rosa watched him the whole time, with an expression that slowly, grudgingly shifted from suspicion into something closer to curiosity. When he'd poured a cup, he poured a second one and set it down on the counter in front of her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You were up before me making breakfast for a house full of people who probably never once said thank you. Figured somebody should." Nathan raised his cup. "Thank you." Rosa didn't say anything. But when Nathan left the kitchen, she was still holding that cup of coffee, and she was looking at the doorway he'd walked out of, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to see. That was how it started. Not with grand gestures. With coffee. With Nathan Walker moving through that cold, enormous house, the exact same way he moved through his garage, treating the butler and the maids and the groundskeepers like people instead of furniture. And slowly, one small kindness at a time, chipping away at the wall they'd all built against him. But the butler, a man named Hargrove, did not thaw. If anything, he got colder. And on the fourth day, Nathan found out why. Howe was coming down the back stairs when he heard Hargrove's voice, low and careful, coming from the pantry. Nathan stopped. He wasn't a man who made a habit of eavesdropping. But he heard his own name, and he heard something else that turned his blood to ice. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," Hargrove was saying. "The mechanic. He sleeps in her room, yes. But I've seen nothing that suggests it's genuine." "No, sir. They barely speak at breakfast." A pause. "Of course, sir. I understand the arrangement. The moment I have something concrete, you'll be the first to know. And the second half of the payment." Nathan stood frozen on the stairs, his heart hammering. Hargrove was on Richard's payroll. Claire had warned him. She'd said the staff might be bought. But hearing it out loud, hearing the man's oily little voice, negotiating a bribe to destroy them, was something else entirely. Nathan's first instinct was to storm into that pantry and grab the man by his collar. His second better instinct, the one his father had drilled into him, was to say nothing and think. Because if Hargrove knew Nathan had hurt him, Hargrove would know to be careful, and a careful enemy was far more dangerous than a sloppy one. So Nathan backed up the stairs, silent as smoke, and he went to find Claire. She was in the study she used as a home office on the phone, as always, and when she saw the look on his face, she said something quick into the receiver and hung up. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't a question. She'd already read it in his eyes. "Your butler," Nathan said. "Hargrove. He's talking to Richard. I just heard him on the phone in the pantry. He's getting paid to report on us, and he just told your uncle the marriage looks fake because we barely talk at breakfast." Claire went very still. And then, to Nathan's surprise, she didn't look shocked. She looked tired. Bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Hargrove has worked for this family for 20 years, she said quietly. "He carried me on his shoulders at my 7th birthday party. My father trusted him with everything." She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. "And Richard bought him for what, a few $1,000s, God. This is my whole life, Nathan. Everyone I've ever known eventually turns out to have a price." And there it was again, that thing Nathan kept catching glimpses of, the deep old wound underneath all that armor. This woman didn't just distrust people. She'd been taught over and over by everyone who was supposed to love her that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Not everyone," Nathan said. Claire looked at him. "You're the one man in this house I'm paying, Nathan. Forgive me if that doesn't fill me with faith in humanity." The words stung more than they should have, and Nathan felt them land, but he didn't flinch. "Fair enough," he said. "But here's the thing. Your uncle's man just handed us a gift, and he doesn't even know it." "A gift?" "Hargrove said the marriage looks fake because we don't talk at breakfast. So we start talking at breakfast. We start talking everywhere. Every single thing that man reports back to Richard we control. We feed him exactly the story we want your uncle to believe." Nathan leaned forward. "You wanted theater, Claire. Well, now we know who's sitting in the front row. Let's give him a show he'll never forget." For a moment, Claire just stared at him. And then slowly the tiredness in her face gave way to something sharper, something that looked almost like the beginning of a smile. "You," she said, "are not what I expected. People keep telling me that." Starting the next morning, everything changed. Nathan came down to breakfast and pulled out Claire's chair before she sat. He asked about her day, her meetings, her worries, loud enough for Hargrove to hear every word, and Claire, catching on, fast answered him with a warmth she didn't feel, but performed to perfection. They laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Nathan reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and Claire let him, and out of the corner of his eye, he watched Hargrove watching them, and he felt a grim satisfaction he hadn't felt in weeks. But here was the thing Nathan didn't expect. Here was the thing that would change everything. The theater started to feel real. It's a strange thing to pretend to care about someone. You start by faking the words. You start by performing the gestures. But you can't ask a person about their day every single day, and listen to the answers, and not slowly start to actually care what the answer is. Nathan asked Claire about her meetings because Hargrove was listening. But somewhere in the second week, he realized he was asking because he wanted to know. He was learning the rhythms of her, the way she went quiet when a deal was going badly, the way her shoulders climbed toward her ears when she was stressed, the way she pretended not to eat dessert and then ate half of his. And Claire, for her part, found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She found herself looking forward to breakfast. The turning point. The moment neither of them could pretend hadn't happened came about 3 weeks in at a company event Nathan hadn't wanted to attend. It was a formal thing, a dinner for the senior executives and their spouses, exactly the kind of room Nathan Walker had spent his whole life avoiding. He put on the suit Claire's assistant had bought him, and he stood in that ballroom feeling like a wrench in a drawer full of butter knives, and he watched the way these people moved, all that easy confidence that came from never once in their lives wondering if they could pay a bill. And he watched the way they treated the staff. There was a young woman working the event, one of the catering servers, and she couldn't have been more than 20. She was carrying a tray of champagne glasses, and one of the executives, a thick-necked man named Prescott, who ran the company's logistics division, stuck out his foot. Nathan saw it. He saw the whole thing, the deliberate little movement, the smirk, and the girl went down hard, the tray shattering across the marble floor, champagne and broken glass everywhere, and the whole room turned to look, and Prescott laughed. "Watch where you're going, sweetheart," Prescott said to a chorus of chuckles from the men around him. "Or is that too much to ask for what they're paying you?" The girl was on her knees on the floor, cheeks burning, trying to gather the broken glass with her bare hands, and nobody moved to help her. 9-10 of the most powerful people in the state, and not one of them moved. Nathan moved. He crossed that ballroom in about 4 seconds, and he knelt down on the marble next to the girl, and he started helping her pick up the glass. "You okay?" he asked her quietly. "Don't use your hands, honey, you'll cut yourself. Here." He took off his suit jacket, the expensive one, and he used it to sweep the broken glass into a pile. "It's all right. It happens. Nobody's mad at you." "Sir, you don't have to." The girl started, her voice shaking. "I got 2 friends about your grandpa's age who bust tables and wash cars for a living," Nathan said. "Anybody trips one of them, they answer to me. You didn't do a thing wrong." Then he stood up, and he turned, and he looked Prescott dead in the eye. "You want to apologize to this young lady, or you want everyone in this room to keep watching a grown man laugh at a kid he tripped on purpose?" The ballroom went silent. Dead silent. Prescott's smile curdled. "Excuse me," Prescott said. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yeah," Nathan said. "You're a man who trips waitresses. I know exactly who you are. Question is whether you want everybody else to." For a long, dangerous moment, the two men just stared at each other. And then from across the room, Claire's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Bill," she said, walking toward them, and every eye in the room swung to her. "Is there a problem?" Prescott straightened. "Claire, your husband seems to have misunderstood a small accident." "It wasn't an accident," Nathan said flatly. "He stuck his foot out. I watched him do it." Claire looked at the girl on the floor. She looked at the broken glass, and Nathan's ruined jacket, and the terrified young server, and then she looked at Prescott, and something in her face went very cold and very quiet. "Bill Prescott," she said, "you've worked for this company for 14 years. My father promoted you personally." She let that hang in the air. "He would be ashamed of what I just watched. Apologize to this young woman, now, and then go home. We'll discuss your future here on Monday." The color drained out of Prescott's face. "Claire, you can't be serious. Over a caterer." "Over a human being," Claire said. "Apologize." Prescott apologized. It was stiff and furious, and clearly meant nothing, but he said the words, and then he turned and walked out of the ballroom, and the whole room watched him go. And when he was gone, Claire crouched down next to the young server, right there in her $1,000 dress on the marble floor, and she took the girl's hands and checked them for cuts, and Nathan watched her do it, and something in his chest cracked wide open. Because this was the woman the world called an ice queen. This was the cold, calculating CEO everyone said had no heart. And here she was on her knees in a ballroom holding the hands of a scared kid nobody else would even look at. Later that night in the back of the car on the way home, Claire was quiet for a long time. And then she said without looking at him, "You didn't have to do that. Prescott runs an entire division. You made an enemy tonight." "I've had worse enemies than a bully in an expensive suit," Nathan said. "Why did you do it?" Nathan thought about it. "Because that girl was somebody's daughter," he said finally. "And nobody was standing up for her. Where I come from, you see somebody knocked down, you help them up. Doesn't matter who's watching. Doesn't matter what it costs you. You just do it because it's right, and because someday you might be the one on the floor." Claire turned and looked at him then, and in the passing lights of the highway, Nathan saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. She was looking at him the way you look at something you're trying to figure out. Something that doesn't fit the equations you've always used to understand the world. "You really believe that?" she said. "It's not an act. You actually believe people are worth helping even when there's nothing in it for you." "Don't you?" Claire looked out the window. "I used to," she said quietly. "A long time ago, before I learned what people are really like." "Maybe you learned it from the wrong people." She didn't answer that, but she didn't argue with it either. And when they got home that night, and they lay down on their separate sides of the pillow wall, Nathan noticed that Claire didn't build the barricade quite as high as she usually did. The days turned into weeks, and Nathan settled into a strange double life. 3 days a week he drove back out to the garage, back to Earl and Pete, back to the grease and the noise, and the work that made sense to him. He'd used part of Claire's first payment to catch up the mortgage, and the sheer relief on those two old men's faces when he told them the shop was safe was worth more to him than every fancy dinner in that mansion. But he didn't tell them the truth about how he'd saved it. He couldn't. So he let them believe he'd married for love, and Earl teased him about it endlessly, and Pete just watched him with those knowing old eyes and never said a word, and Nathan wondered how much the old man had already guessed. And the other 4 days, he lived in Claire's world. And slowly, that world stopped feeling like a costume he was wearing, and started feeling like a place he actually knew. He started visiting the factories. Nobody asked him to. But Nathan Walker had spent his whole life around working people, and sitting in that mansion doing nothing made his skin crawl. So one afternoon, he had the driver take him out to one of the Whitmore Group's manufacturing plants, and he walked the floor, and he talked to the line workers, and he listened. And what he heard troubled him. The machines on line 3 keep jamming. A foreman named Danny told him once he'd figured out Nathan actually wanted to know. "We've been reporting it for 8 months. Corporate keeps saying they'll send someone. Nobody comes. We lose 2-3 hours a shift. Guys are getting written up for missing quota on machines that don't work. Show me, Nathan said. Sir. Show me the machines. I fix things for a living. Let's have a look. Danny stared at him. The heiress's husband in his nice clothes, wanting to look at a broken conveyor. But he led Nathan back to line 3, and Nathan rolled up his sleeves, and he spent the next 3 hours crawling around inside that machinery with a borrowed set of tools, and by the end of it, he was covered in grease and grinning like a kid, and line 3 was running smooth for the first time in 8 months. There's a bearing worn out on the main drive, he told Danny, wiping his hands. Cheap part, $20. Somebody should have caught it months ago. And your intake belt's misaligned, that's what's causing half the jams. I tightened it up, but you'll want to replace it inside a month. He clapped the foreman on the shoulder. Nobody should be getting written up over this. That's a corporate failure, not a worker one. I'll make sure the write-ups get cleared. Word spread through that factory like wildfire. The boss's husband, the rich woman's trophy, had spent his afternoon on his back, in the grease fixing a machine nobody else would fix, and then he'd gone to bat for the workers over the write-ups. By the time Claire heard about it, the story had traveled through 3 plants. She confronted him about it that night, and Nathan couldn't quite tell if she was angry. You cleared 30 disciplinary actions today, she said. On your own authority, which you don't actually have, by the way, since technically you don't work for the company. Those write-ups were wrong, Nathan said. The machines were broken. You can't punish a man for missing a quota when you gave him a broken tool to hit it with. That's not right, Claire, and somewhere down deep, you know it's not right. That's not the point. Then what's the point? Claire opened her mouth, closed it. And then, to Nathan's astonishment, she sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands. The point, she said muffled, is that in 6 weeks, you've done more to earn the loyalty of my workers than I've managed in 8 months of running this company. They love you, Nathan. Do you understand that the people on those factory floors, the ones who matter, the ones this whole fight is about, they'd walk through fire for you now, and I'm the one who inherited it. I'm the one who's supposed to lead them. She looked up, and her eyes were bright. And I don't have the first idea how to make people feel the way you make them feel just by walking into a room. Nathan sat down next to her on his side of where the pillow wall usually went. You want to know how to make people love you, he said gently. You already know. I watched you do it 3 weeks ago on a ballroom floor. You just don't trust yourself to do it, because every time you've let anybody see that part of you, somebody's used it against you. He paused. Claire, those workers wouldn't love me any less if they knew I was there because you sent me. The fixing isn't the trick. The caring is the trick. And you care more than anybody I've ever met. You just hide it like it's something to be ashamed of. Claire looked at him for a long, long moment. And Nathan realized too late how close they were sitting. He realized he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, and the small scar above her eyebrow, and the way her breath had gone just slightly shallow. And he realized she was looking at his mouth. And then a phone rang somewhere in the house, and the spell broke, and Claire stood up fast, and straightened her jacket, and said something about a call she'd forgotten, and she was gone. Nathan sat there alone on the edge of the enormous bed, his heart going like a jackhammer, and he said out loud to nobody, "Oh, this is bad, this is very bad." Because Nathan Walker had just realized something he'd been refusing to see for weeks. He wasn't pretending anymore. Somewhere between the coffee and the ballroom and the broken machine online. 3. He had fallen quietly and completely for the woman he was being paid to lie beside. And there was no clause in any contract for that. There was no clause at all. The storm came a few nights later. It rolled in off the hills after midnight, a real Tennessee thunderstorm. The kind that shakes the windows in their frames and lights the whole world white for half a second at a time. Nathan had always loved storms. He'd grown up sleeping through them, lulled by the sound. So he was half asleep on his side of the pillow wall when he heard it. A sound. Small and sharp and quickly stifled. A gasp. He came awake all the way and lay still, listening, and he heard it again, and then he heard the mattress shift, and he heard Claire's breathing fast and ragged, and he understood. She was terrified. "Claire, he said quietly into the dark. Nothing. Just that shallow, panicked breathing, and then a crash of thunder that shook the whole house, and a sound from the other side of the pillows that Nathan would never forget. A tiny, involuntary whimper, the sound of a grown woman trying not to make any sound at all. The fearless CEO. The woman who negotiated with men who wanted to destroy her and never blinked. The Ice Queen. And she was lying 2 feet away in the dark, so scared of a thunderstorm that she was shaking and doing everything in her power to make sure the man beside her didn't hear. Because she couldn't let anyone see her afraid. She'd been taught her whole life that fear was weakness, and weakness was a thing people used against you. Nathan sat up. And slowly, carefully, he began to take down the wall. He moved the pillows one by one, setting them on the floor, and he heard Claire go rigid on the other side, heard her breath catch for a whole different reason. "Nathan, what are you?" "You don't have to be scared by yourself," he said quietly, moving the last pillow. "That's a lousy way to go through a storm." Lightning lit the room, and for half a second, he saw her sitting up against the headboard with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, her eyes huge and wet and frightened, looking about 9 years old. "I'm not scared," she said, and her voice broke completely in the middle of the lie. "I know," Nathan said gently, "but just in case." He held out his hand across the empty space where the wall used to be. "You don't have to face every storm alone, Claire. Not while I'm here. That's not in the contract, but I mean it anyway." For a long moment she didn't move. And then thunder cracked again, and she flinched, and something in her finally let go, and she reached out and took his hand, and Nathan held it, and he felt her fingers gripping his like she was drowning. "When I was little," she said in a small voice he'd never heard from her, "there were storms like this, and my mother would come and sit with me until they passed. And then she left. And after that, when the storms came, there was nobody. My father was always traveling. It was just me alone in that huge house with all the thunder." She let out a shaky breath. "I never told anyone that. Not once. In 27 years. "You just did," Nathan said. "I just did." She laughed, and it turned into something that was almost a sob. "God, what is happening to me? I don't fall apart. I never fall apart. And you've been in my house 6 weeks, and I'm sitting here holding your hand in a thunderstorm telling you about my mother." "Maybe," Nathan said carefully. "You've just been holding it together by yourself for so long that you forgot it was allowed to be somebody else's turn to hold it for a while." Claire went quiet. And in the dark, still gripping his hand, she said the thing that neither of them was ready for. "I don't want you to be pretending," she whispered. "Right now, in this moment. I don't want it to be theater. Just for tonight, can it not be for Hargrove or Richard or the contract? Can it just be real?" Nathan's heart stopped and then slammed back into motion. "Claire," he said, and his voice was rough. "It stopped being pretend for me a long time ago. That's the part I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere around the coffee or the ballroom or the day I fixed that machine, and you looked at me like I was somebody worth looking at. But I'm not acting anymore. I haven't been for weeks. And it scares me more than any storm ever has, because you're paying me, and I don't ever want you to think that changes what's real." The storm raged outside. But inside in the dark, neither of them said anything for a long moment. And then Nathan felt Claire move closer across the empty space where the wall had been, and he felt her rest, her head against his shoulder. Tentative, terrified, and he put his arm around her and she didn't pull away. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They just sat there together in the dark while the thunder rolled. Two people who had entered each other's lives through a business contract, holding on to each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Nathan thought his heart might burst from how happy and how afraid he was both at once. But a mile away, in a black car parked outside the gate, a phone was ringing. And in a penthouse across town, Richard Whitmore was pouring himself a drink and smiling a cold, patient smile because his investigator had just told him something very interesting. The mechanic was falling for her, genuinely. Which meant Richard understood that the mechanic now had a weakness. And a man with a weakness could always be broken. Richard set down his phone. He walked to his window and looked out over the city. His brother had built the city he intended to own. "Enjoy it while it lasts, sweetheart. he said softly to a daughter who couldn't hear him. "Because I'm about to find out exactly what your husband's really worth. And every man has a number, even the honest ones, especially the honest ones." And he picked up the phone again, and he made a call, and he set in motion the one move that would test whether the thing growing in that mansion was real, or whether it was just as Richard had believed all along, another lie waiting for the right price to expose it. The call Richard made that night reached a private investigator named Marcus Dade, and by the following morning, Dade had a folder on his desk that told him everything he needed to know about the man standing between Richard Whitmore and $500 million. Nathan Walker, 35. Divorced. One failing auto shop dragged back from foreclosure at the last possible minute by a mysterious infusion of cash. Two elderly employees he could not afford to keep but kept anyway, and a father, recently deceased, who had built that garage from nothing. Dade circled that last detail with a red pen. The father. The garage. That was the pressure point. Every man had one, and Nathan Walker's was written all over that folder in block letters. He didn't care about himself. He cared about the things he'd been left to protect. "He'll never take a bribe for his own sake," Dade told Richard over the phone. "I've seen 100 of these guys, the honest ones. You can't buy them a boat, but you can always buy them for somebody they love. Find the thing he's trying to save and threaten it or offer to make it permanent. That's the door." Richard smiled. "Then let's open the door." But the door didn't open the way Richard expected. Because while Richard was building his trap, something was happening inside that mansion that no investigator's folder could account for. The morning after the storm. Nathan came down to breakfast and found Claire already at the table, and for the first time since he'd moved in, she wasn't on her phone. She was just sitting there with her coffee waiting for him, and when he walked in, her whole face changed, softened in a way she couldn't hide fast enough. "Morning," she said. "Morning." Nathan sat down. Hargrove was in the corner pretending to polish silver, listening to every word, and both of them knew it. But for the first time, neither of them was performing for him. The warmth in the room was real, and it was so obvious that Hargrove looked genuinely confused, like a man watching a play whose actors had forgotten they were acting. "I slept," Claire said quietly, so only Nathan could hear. During the storm. I actually slept. I haven't slept through a storm since I was 6 years old." "Good," Nathan said. And under the table out of Hargrove's sight, Claire's hand found his, and she held it, and it had nothing to do with theater at all. It should have been the happiest week of Nathan's life. And in some ways it was. But there was a shadow over it, a cold, sick feeling in his gut that wouldn't go away, and he knew exactly what it was. It was the $50,000. It was the contract in the drawer upstairs. Because every time Claire smiled at him, every time she reached for his hand, a small, ugly voice in the back of his mind whispered the same poison. "She's paying you. This whole thing started because she wrote you a check. How will you ever know if any of it is real? How will she—" That voice got louder 3 days later when Richard Whitmore made his move. It was a Tuesday late afternoon, and Nathan was back at the garage. He was under a Buick with Earl handing him tools and Pete making coffee that was somehow worse than the diner's. And for a couple of hours, he'd almost forgotten about mansions and contracts and thunderstorms. Then a car pulled into the lot. Not a customer's car. A long black car, the kind that didn't belong on a street like this. And a man in an expensive suit got out and asked in a smooth, unhurried voice whether he might have a few minutes of Nathan Walker's time. Nathan rolled out from under the Buick, wiped his hands, and knew immediately that this was trouble. Earl and Pete felt it too. The garage went quiet. "I'm Nathan Walker," Nathan said. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Marcus Dade. I work for Richard Whitmore." The man smiled pleasantly. "I think you and I should talk somewhere private. It's in your interest, I promise you." Nathan glanced at Earl and Pete. "Give us a minute, fellas." He walked Dade out to the edge of the lot away from the old men, and he crossed his arms. "Say what you came to say." Dade didn't waste time. He was too professional for that. "Mr. Whitmore is aware of your arrangement with his niece. The marriage, the contract, the $50,000. He knows all of it. And frankly, Mr. Walker, he's impressed. You've played a difficult role very convincingly." Dade let that sit. "But here's the situation. That marriage is going to fall apart. It's a matter of when, not if. And when it does, Claire loses the company and Mr. Whitmore takes control. That's happening regardless of anything you do. The only question left is whether you walk away from this with $50,000 or with a great deal more. Nathan said nothing. Dade reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope thick, and he held it out. $100,000. Cash. Double what she promised you. All Mr. Whitmore needs is a signed statement from you, confirming the marriage was a financial arrangement. No feelings. No real relationship. Just a signature on a piece of paper you already know is true. He smiled again. And there's more. Mr. Whitmore is prepared to buy this garage outright and sign it over to you free and clear, along with a maintenance fund large enough to keep your two friends employed here for the rest of their natural lives. Every single thing you're fighting for, Mr. Walker. Handed to you, permanently, for one signature about something that's already true. Nathan looked at the envelope. And here is the thing that Richard Whitmore and Marcus Dade and every rich man who had ever looked at Nathan Walker and seen a price tag could never understand. He wasn't tempted by the money. He was tempted by the truth of it. Because the poisonous little voice in his head, the one that had been whispering to him since the storm, spoke up now loud and clear. It's true, isn't it? It was a financial arrangement. She did pay you. Everything Richard's man is saying is technically factually correct. And if you sign it, you save the garage forever, you save Earl and Pete forever, and you walk away from a woman who only entered your life because she needed a signature. Aren't you just as much a hired man as this fellow with the envelope? What's the difference between his 100,000 and her 50? Nathan stood there in the cold, and for one terrible moment, he genuinely considered it. Not because he wanted Richard's money, but because signing that paper would end the awful uncertainty. It would let him stop wondering whether he was a husband or an employee. It would let him walk away from the one thing in his life he couldn't fix with his hands, which was the question of whether Claire Whitmore could ever love a man she'd bought. And then he thought about the storm. He thought about her small voice in the dark, telling him about her mother, telling him she'd never said it to anyone in 27 years. And he understood that if he signed that paper, if he let this smiling man in the expensive suit turn what happened in that storm into a line item on a contract he would be doing to Claire, the exact thing that had broken her in the first place, he would be proving one more time that everyone in her life eventually had a price. Nathan pushed the envelope back toward Dade's chest. "No," he said. Dade's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Mr. Walker, think carefully. This is the best offer you will ever receive in your life. Your father's garage secured forever. Your friends secured forever. $100,000 in your hand today, in exchange for confirming a fact you already know to be true. There's no downside. There's no betrayal. The marriage is fake. You'd just be saying so. You don't get it," Nathan said quietly. "And you never will, because guys like your boss don't have the equipment to get it. So let me spell it out real slow. It doesn't matter to me what's technically true on paper. What matters is what a man does when nobody's making him. And no amount of money you put in that envelope is going to make me walk into that woman's life and prove to her that everybody's for sale. Because that's the thing that broke her heart in the first place, and I would rather lose that garage and everything in it than be one more person who taught her she was right not to trust anybody." He stepped back. "Get off my lot. And tell Richard Whitmore he can keep his 100,000. It's not enough. There isn't a number that's enough. Not for this." Dade studied him for a long, cold moment, and then he put the envelope back inside his jacket and he nodded slowly, almost respectfully, like a hunter acknowledging a difficult animal. "You know," he said, "I told him you'd say no." He turned toward his car. "But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Walker. Your refusal doesn't help you. It only tells Mr. Whitmore that you're in love with her. And a man in love is far easier to destroy than a man who wants money. Because a man who wants money, you can pay off. A man in love, you can only break." He opened the car door. "Enjoy the rest of your time in the mansion. It's going to be shorter than you think." And he drove away, and Nathan stood alone in the lot with his heart pounding And he understood two terrible things at once. The first was that he had just passed the most important test of his life. The second was that passing it had made everything more dangerous, not less. Richard now knew exactly where Nathan was weak, and Richard was going to use it. Nathan should have gone straight home and told Claire everything. That was the smart thing, the honest thing. But he didn't. And the reason he didn't was the poison. Because sitting in his truck outside the garage replaying the whole conversation, Nathan couldn't stop hearing Dade's voice. "The marriage is fake. You'd just be saying so." And even though he'd refused, even though he'd meant every word, the doubt had gotten inside him. It had found the crack that had always been there, and it started to spread. He drove home in silence. And when he walked into the mansion that night, something in him had changed, and Claire felt it the instant she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she said immediately. "Nathan, what happened?" "Nothing," he said. "Long day at the shop." It was the first lie he'd told her that mattered, and she knew it. He watched her know it. He watched the warmth that had been growing in her eyes for weeks flicker and cool and start to close. "Okay," she said carefully. "If you say so." And that was how it began. The slow, terrible unraveling. Not with a fight, with a silence. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan pulled away. He couldn't help it. Every time Claire reached for his hand, the poison whispered, "She's paying you," and he'd pull back a half inch, just enough for her to feel it. Every time she smiled at him across the breakfast table, he'd think about Dade's envelope, and the words, "a financial arrangement," and something in his own face would shut down. He stopped meeting her eyes. He started spending more nights at the garage, sleeping on the cot in the back office, instead of coming home to the pillow wall that hadn't gone back up since the storm. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself that if he pulled away now before it got any deeper, it would hurt her less. When the year was over and the contract ended and they went back to their separate lives. He told himself a lot of things, but the truth, the real truth underneath all of it, was uglier and simpler. Nathan Walker could not stand the idea that the woman he loved had entered his life through a purchase. He'd spent his whole life earning everything he had with his own 2 hands, refusing charity, refusing shortcuts, and now the most important thing in his life had come to him because somebody wrote a check. And his pride, the same stubborn pride that had kept that garage open 11 years past, all reason could not swallow it. And Claire, watching the man she'd started to trust pull away from her, one silence at a time, came to the only conclusion her whole life had ever taught her to reach. He was leaving, just like everybody left. She didn't cry about it. She'd learned not to cry a long time ago. Instead, she got colder and sharper, and she rebuilt the walls Nathan had spent 6 weeks taking down brick by brick until the woman who had held his hand in a thunderstorm was gone, and the Ice Queen was back, and the breakfast table went silent again, and this time it wasn't theater. "You got what you wanted, didn't you?" she said to him one night. It was late. They were in the bedroom on opposite sides of the bed, and the pillow wall was back higher than it had ever been. "The garage is saved. Your friends are safe. You've got your money. And now you're counting down the days." Her voice was flat, controlled, but Nathan heard the crack under it. "It's fine, Nathan. You don't have to keep pretending it ever meant anything. I released you from that part weeks ago." "That's not what this is," Nathan said. "Then what is it?" And this was his moment. This was where he should have told her. About Dade, about the envelope, about the $100,000 he'd refused, about the poison that had gotten into his head. If he'd told her the truth right then, everything would have been different. But the poison was still there, and it spoke for him instead. "It's nothing," he said. "It's just been a long few weeks." Claire looked at him for a long moment. And then she nodded slowly, and something in her face went very still and very final. And Nathan realized he had just confirmed everything she had ever believed about people who claimed to care about her. "Right," she said quietly. "Of course it has." She turned off the light. And in the dark, on opposite sides of the wall, they lay awake, both of them, heartbroken, both of them, certain. The other one didn't care. Neither of them saying the one true thing that could have fixed it, and that Nathan would come to understand was the cruelest thing Richard Whitmore had ever done. He hadn't even had to break them apart. He'd just put a little poison in Nathan's head and let Nathan's own pride and Claire's own old wounds do the rest. The year was 10 months gone. 2 months left. And in those 2 months, Richard made his final preparations. Because he'd realized something watching from a distance as the marriage went cold. He didn't need to prove the marriage was fake anymore. The marriage looked fake now all on its own. The two of them had stopped touching, stopped talking. His investigators reported separate sleeping arrangements, silent dinners, a husband who spent most nights away from home. It was from the outside, exactly the picture of a business arrangement falling apart. And Richard had one more card to play. It came in the form of a document. Nathan's own words from that conversation in the garage lot. Because what Nathan hadn't known, what Dade had never mentioned, was that the whole conversation had been recorded. A tiny device in Dade's jacket pocket. And on that recording was Nathan Walker's own voice, clear as day, saying the words. Yes, it was a financial arrangement. Yes, she paid me. Admitting the entire thing in the course of refusing the bribe. Richard's lawyers had spent weeks with that recording, cutting it, editing it, splicing it, until the refusal was gone, and only the confession remained. And Nathan's voice, out of context, said everything Richard needed a room full of executives to hear. How was going to play it at the board meeting. The final board meeting. The one where Claire's fate, and the company's fate, would be decided once and for all. And he was going to destroy Nathan Walker with Nathan Walker's own honesty. Nathan found out about the board meeting the way he found out about most things in that world, which was late and by accident. Claire mentioned it in passing in the middle of one of their cold, silent dinners in the flat voice she used for everything now. There's a board meeting Friday, she said, not looking up from her plate. The final review. Richard's requesting a full audit of the marriage before the year completes. It's his last chance to challenge the inheritance. She took a sip of water. You should be there. It'll look strange if my husband doesn't come to the meeting that decides everything. Then it'll be over. 8 more weeks after that, and the year's done, and you'll be free, and we can both stop doing this. Free. The word landed on Nathan like a dropped engine block. Because he didn't want to be free. He wanted the exact opposite of free. He wanted to knock down the pillow wall and take her hand and tell her about the envelope and the recording device he didn't even know existed, and the poison that had wrecked everything. But the words wouldn't come. The pride wouldn't let them. So all he said was, I'll be there. Good, Claire said. And they finished their dinner in silence. 2 people at opposite ends of a long table. 2 people who loved each other and had let a rich man and their own broken hearts convince them it wasn't real. The night before the board meeting, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay on his side of the wall, staring at the ceiling, and he thought about his father. He thought about the thing his father used to say back when Nathan was a boy, and the world seemed simple. A man's word is the only thing he really owns, son. Everything else they can take. But your word, you have to give away. Nobody can steal it from you. You can only sell it. And once you've sold it, you're not worth buying anymore. Nathan had refused to sell his word to Richard Whitmore. He'd been so proud of that. But lying there in the dark, 2 feet and a wall of pillows away from the woman he loved, he understood finally that refusing the bribe hadn't been enough. Because he'd let the poison do Richard's work for him. He'd pulled away from Claire out of pride, and in doing so, he'd hurt her worse than any envelope ever could have. He'd taught her all over again that people leave. That caring was a trap. That she'd been a fool to hold his hand in a storm. And he'd let her believe it for 2 months because he was too proud to say 4 simple words. Claire, he said into the dark, are you awake? There was a long silence. And then quietly from the other side of the wall, yes. There's something I should have told you a long time ago, Nathan said. His heart was hammering. 2 months ago, a man came to the garage. He worked for your uncle. He offered me $100,000 to sign a statement saying our marriage was fake. He heard the sheets shift. He heard her go still. I said no, Nathan said. I told him there wasn't a number big enough. I pushed the money back at him and I told him to get off my lot. He swallowed. But I didn't tell you. And I should have. And the reason I didn't tell you is the reason I've been so cold these last 2 months. And it's got nothing to do with you, Claire. It's got everything to do with me. Because that man said our marriage was fake technically on paper, and I couldn't stop hearing it. And I got it into my stupid head that I couldn't ever really have you because you'd paid for me, and I'd spent my whole life refusing to be bought, and my pride couldn't take it. So I pulled away. I hurt you to save myself from finding out whether this was real. And that was a coward's move, and I've hated myself for it every single day, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The silence after that was the longest of Nathan's life. And then he heard a sound in the dark, and it took him a moment to understand what it was. Claire was crying, quietly, the way she'd cried in the storm, trying not to be heard. "You refused $100,000, she said, her voice breaking, "and you didn't tell me, for 2 months. You let me think you were leaving. You let me think I was right about everybody." A ragged breath. "Do you have any idea what these 2 months have been like? I thought I'd let you in, and you'd taken what you needed, and now you were counting the days. I thought I was a fool. Again." "I know," Nathan said. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. But Claire, listen to me because this part matters. Tomorrow in that meeting, whatever your uncle does, whatever he says, whatever proof he thinks he has, you need to know one thing." He reached out in the dark, and slowly, carefully, he took down the top pillow, and the next one, and the next, until the wall was gone, and there was nothing between them but a few feet of empty sheet. "This isn't fake, not for me. It hasn't been fake since the storm, maybe since long before that. You didn't buy me. You couldn't have. Because the thing I feel for you was never for sale in the first place." And in the dark, Claire reached across the empty space where the wall had been, and she found his hand, and she gripped it, and Nathan felt 2 months of ice crack and give way all at once. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know. Don't ever do that to me again." "I won't. I swear it. On my father's grave I won't." They didn't sleep much that night either. But this time, it was different. This time, they lay in the dark on the same side of a bed with no wall down the middle of it, holding on to each other, and for the first time in 2 months, neither of them was alone. But even as the ice between them melted, neither Nathan nor Claire knew what was waiting for them the next morning. Neither of them knew about the recording device in Dade's jacket, or the edited tape, or the thing Richard was planning to play in front of the entire board. Nathan thought he'd confessed the worst of it. He thought the danger was behind them. He had no idea that in a matter of hours, in a boardroom full of the most powerful people in the state, his own voice was going to rise up out of a speaker and call his marriage a lie in front of the woman he'd just promised it was real. And he had no idea whether when that moment came, Claire would believe the man lying beside her now, or the recording that confirmed every fear she'd ever had. Richard Whitmore was counting on the recording. He'd built his entire plan around one simple bet, the same bet he'd been making his whole life, the bet that had never once failed him. That when the moment came, when it was Nathan's word against the evidence, a room full of business people would believe the tape. And that Claire Whitmore, deep down, where all her old wounds lived, would believe it too. He was about to find out he'd made the worst bet of his life. They rode to the meeting together the next morning, and for the first time in 2 months, Claire's hand stayed in Nathan's the whole way. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. Whatever was coming, they were going to face it on the same side of the wall now, and that mattered more than any words. But underneath the new warmth between them, Nathan felt a coil of dread tightening in his gut, because he knew Richard Whitmore. He'd only met the man twice, but he knew the type. Men like Richard didn't call a final board meeting unless they were holding something. And Nathan had confessed his own worst secret last night, the bribe, the refusal, the 2 months of silence. So he told himself there was nothing left for Richard to expose. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. "Whatever happens in there," Claire said quietly as the car pulled up to the tower. "We walk out together. I mean it, Nathan. I don't care what the board decides. I don't care about the company. 2 months ago, I'd have told you the company was all I had. And then I nearly lost the one thing that turned out to matter more." She squeezed his hand. "So whatever Richard's got, let him have it. He can take the building. He can't take this." Nathan looked at her, and something in his chest ached, because 8 weeks ago she couldn't have said those words to save her life, and now they came out of her easy as breathing. "He's not taking either one," Nathan said. "Not the company and not us. I don't know how yet, but he's not." The boardroom was on the 40th floor. A long table ringed by the 12 members of the Whitmore Group's board, along with a row of lawyers and 2 of Claire's senior executives. And at the far end, already seated, already smiling, was Richard Whitmore. He rose when they entered, and he came around the table with his hand outstretched, and the sheer oily warmth of him made Nathan's skin crawl. "Claire," Richard said, "and the famous husband. Nathan is it, I've heard so much about you." He shook Nathan's hand, and his grip was firm and cold, and his eyes never stopped smiling, and never once meant it. "The mechanic who swept my niece off her feet. What a beautiful story. Please both of you sit. This won't take long." They sat. And Nathan watched Richard walk back to the head of the table with the loose, unhurried confidence of a man who had already counted the votes, and he understood all at once that Richard wasn't nervous. Not even a little. Which meant Richard had something. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Richard began, "thank you for coming. I'll be brief because the matter before us is simple. My late brother God, rest him, left this company to his daughter on one condition, that she be genuinely married for 1 full year. Not arranged, not staged, genuine. My brother wrote that condition because he wanted his daughter to have a real life, a real partner, not another business transaction. He'd have hated to see this company go to someone who treated even her own marriage as a deal to be closed." Richard paused, and his eyes drifted to Nathan, and the smile widened just slightly. "Which brings us to the unfortunate reason I've called this meeting. Because I have proof, incontrovertible proof, that this marriage is exactly the kind of transaction my brother feared. A fraud, a purchase, and I intend to play it for you now." A murmur went around the table. Claire's hand tightened on Nathan's under the table, but her face stayed perfectly still, that old CEO mask sliding into place. Nathan felt his heart start to pound. Proof. What proof? He'd told Claire everything last night. There was nothing left. 2 months ago, Richard continued, my associate Mr. Marcus Dade had a conversation with Nathan Walker at his automotive garage. During that conversation, Mr. Walker made certain admissions about the true nature of this so-called marriage. Richard produced a small remote control and set it on the table with the delicacy of a man laying down a winning hand. I'd like the board to hear Mr. Walker describe his marriage, in his own words, recorded that afternoon without his knowledge. And that was when Nathan's stomach dropped through the floor, because he understood in one sickening instant exactly what had happened. The conversation in the lot. Dade's smooth, patient voice. The envelope. And Nathan's own words spoken in the course of refusing the bribe. Yes, she paid me. Yes, it was a financial arrangement. He'd said those words. He'd said them to explain why he was turning the money down, but he'd said them, and now they existed on a recording, and Richard was about to play them to a room full of people who didn't know the context. You recorded him, Claire said, and her voice cut across the room like a blade. You sent a man to my husband's place of business, and you recorded him without his consent. Is that even legal, Richard? Tennessee is a one-party consent state, my dear, Richard said pleasantly. Mr. Dade consented. That's all the law requires. Now, shall we listen? He pressed the button, and Nathan's own voice came out of the speaker in the ceiling, tinny but unmistakable, and the whole room went silent to hear it. Yes, Nathan's voice said. Claire paid me $50,000. A pause on the recording. I accepted the deal because I needed help. Another pause. Another cut the edges of it just slightly too clean, though only Nathan seemed to notice. It was a financial arrangement. That's what it was. Richard pressed the button again, and Nathan's voice stopped, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Nathan had ever heard. The board members looked at each other. They looked at Claire. They looked at Nathan with a mixture of pity and contempt, and Nathan saw exactly what they saw. A poor mechanic. A rich woman being played. A fraud confessed in the man's own voice. One of the senior board members, an older woman named Catherine Voss, set down her pen and folded her hands, and her face had gone hard and disappointed. Claire, Catherine said quietly, is this true? Did you pay this man to marry you? And there it was. The moment Richard had built his entire plan around. The moment where it was Nathan's word against a recording of Nathan's own voice. And Richard sat at the head of the table watching Claire's face, waiting for the old wounds to do his work for him, waiting for the woman who'd been betrayed by everyone she ever trusted to hear that tape and believe deep down, where all her fears lived, that she'd been a fool one more time. Claire was quiet for a long moment. And Nathan's heart stopped because he genuinely didn't know whether the 2 months of silence he'd put her through had left a crack that this tape could get into. He'd confessed last night. But confession was just words, and here was a recording, hard evidence, his own voice and every terrible thing Claire had ever believed about people rising up to meet it. She turned and looked at him. And Nathan looked back at her, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing left to say that he hadn't already said in the dark last night. He just let her see his face. He let her see the truth of it. And Claire turned back to the board. "Yes," she said clearly without a flicker of hesitation. "I paid him $50,000. The room stirred. Richard's smile bloomed into something almost triumphant. "But," Claire continued, and her voice was steel now, "that recording is missing something. Isn't it, Richard? It's been cut. Anyone who's listened to 100 hours of deposition tapes can hear the edits. My husband said those words. But he said them in the middle of a sentence Richard doesn't want you to hear the rest of. So why don't we ask him?" She turned to Nathan. "Go ahead, Nathan. Tell them the whole thing. Every word. Tell them what you said to Mr. Dade that afternoon." And Nathan Walker stood up. He wasn't a man who liked to speak in rooms like this. He'd never had cause to. He fixed engines. He worked with his hands. Public speaking to a table of millionaires was about the furthest thing from his world he could imagine. But he stood up, and he buttoned his jacket the way Claire's assistant had taught him weeks ago, and he looked around that long table, and when he spoke his voice was steady. "Everything on that tape is true," Nathan said. "I want to start there so nobody thinks I'm about to call the man a liar about the facts. Claire paid me $50,000. I took it. I needed it. My father built a garage with his own 2 hands, and I was about to lose it, and I had 2 old men working for me who'd have nothing if that place went under. So when Claire offered me a way to save it, I said yes. That's real. That's on the tape, and it's true, and I'm not ashamed of it." He let that sit. The room was dead quiet. "But here's the part Mr. Whitmore cut out," Nathan went on. "That conversation at my garage wasn't Dade catching me confessing. That conversation was Dade trying to buy me. Richard Whitmore sent that man to my shop with an envelope. $100,000 in cash. Double what Claire ever paid me. And all I had to do for it was sign a piece of paper saying this marriage was a fraud, and Richard would not only give me the $100,000, he'd buy my father's garage outright and hand it to me free and clear, and set up a fund to keep my 2 employees paid for the rest of their lives." Nathan looked around the table, meeting each face. "Everything I was fighting for. Everything. Handed to me on a silver platter. Permanent. For one signature." The murmur that went around the room now had a different quality to it. Catherine Voss picked her pen back up. Richard's smile had frozen. "So yes," Nathan said. "I told Dade our marriage started as a financial arrangement because it did, and I don't lie, not even when the truth's inconvenient. But the reason I was saying it was to tell him no. I pushed that envelope back into his chest, and I told him there wasn't a number big enough. $100,000 a fund for my friends, my father's garage saved forever, and I turned it down flat and told him to get off my property." He turned and looked directly at Richard. "You want to play the board a recording of that conversation? Play the whole thing. Play the part where your man offers me the bribe. Play the part where I refuse it. You've got the tape. It's all on there. Go ahead, Richard. Play it." The silence stretched, and Richard Whitmore did not reach for the remote. "He won't," Nathan said quietly to the board, "because the rest of that tape proves the exact opposite of what he wants you to believe. A man who's in a marriage for the money takes the 100,000. That's just arithmetic. Richard offered me double what Claire paid, plus everything else I've ever wanted, and I said no. Ask yourselves why a man would do that. There's only one reason. The same reason I stopped being able to take that money the second the man said the words." Nathan's voice dropped. Because somewhere in the last few months, this marriage stopped being about the money for me. It stopped being a job. I fell in love with my wife, and you cannot pay a man to walk away from that. There's no envelope thick enough. He sat down. And the boardroom erupted, everyone talking at once, and through it all, Richard Whitmore sat very still at the head of the table, his triumphant smile gone, replaced by something cold and cornered, and Nathan understood that he'd just watched a man's entire plan come apart in real time. But Richard was not finished. Men like Richard were never finished until the very last card was played. He held up a hand, and slowly the room quieted, and he leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice had lost all its oily warmth. It had gone flat and hard and dangerous. "A very moving speech," Richard said. "There's just one problem with it. There's no proof. Mr. Walker claims I offered him a bribe. I claim I didn't. His word against mine. And the only recording of that conversation is the one I've already played." He spread his hands. "So we're left exactly where we started. A confessed financial arrangement. A marriage my brother's will explicitly forbids. And a man asking you to take his word over hard evidence, when he's already admitted he was paid to be in this room." He looked around the table. I'm sorry, Claire, but sentiment isn't proof. And this board has a fiduciary duty. You cannot award control of a $500 million company based on a mechanic's love story." And for a moment, the room wavered. Because Richard was right about one thing. It was Nathan's word against his. And a board of business people dealt in evidence, not speeches. Nathan felt the tide start to turn back, felt the pity and contempt starting to creep back into the faces around the table, and his heart began to sink because he had no proof. He hadn't recorded Dade. He hadn't even known Dade was recording him. It really was just his word. And then Claire stood up. "You're right, Richard," she said. "Sentiment isn't proof. So let's talk about proof." She reached into her bag, and she pulled out a slim folder, and she set it on the table. "2 months ago, my husband came home from his garage acting strange, cold, distant. He wouldn't tell me why, and for 2 months it nearly destroyed our marriage because I thought he was pulling away from me. I thought he was leaving." Her voice caught just slightly, and then steadied. "It was only last night that he finally told me the truth. About the envelope. About the $100,000. About turning it down. And when he told me, I did what I always do when something matters. I checked." She opened the folder. "Marcus Dade," Claire said, "used a rental car to drive to my husband's garage that afternoon. Charged to a corporate account. This company's corporate account, Richard, because you were sloppy, and you billed your own investigator to the very company you were trying to steal." She laid a page on the table. "Here's the rental record. Here's the mileage matching the round trip to Nathan's shop. Here's Dade's expense report for that week, which someone in accounting was kind enough to pull for me this morning, and which includes, and I want to read this exactly as it's written, a cash withdrawal of $100,000 logged as, quote, acquisition-related settlement, unquote, and dated the same afternoon Dade visited my husband." She looked up. "You gave your man $100,000 in cash to take to my husband's garage. It's in your own books, Richard. You documented your own bribe." The boardroom went utterly silent. Richard's face had gone gray. That's a misclassified expense," Richard said, and for the first time his smooth voice stumbled. "It has nothing to do with that's a routine acquisition cost. It's an acquisition of what?" Catherine Voss said sharply. "There were no acquisitions that week, Richard. I sit on the finance committee. I'd know. What did you spend $100,000 in cash on? And why did you send it to the home garage of your niece's husband on the exact day her husband says you tried to bribe him?" Richard opened his mouth, and nothing came out. And here's the part. Claire continued, relentless, now laying down another page, "that I think this board will find most interesting. Because you didn't just try to bribe my husband, Richard. You've been paying my butler, Hargrove, for 8 months, reporting on us. I have those payments too, once I knew to look for them. Small transfers monthly from a shell account that traces back to you in about 4 steps. So let's tally it up, shall we? You bribed my household staff to spy on us. You sent a man to bribe my husband to lie. You billed both operations to the company you're claiming you should control because I'm the one who can't be trusted with it. She closed the folder. My father wrote that condition into his will because he wanted to know that whoever ran this company had integrity, character. He set a test, and I think we've just learned in the clearest possible terms which of us passed it. The room exploded again, and this time there was nothing pitying in it. The board members were staring at Richard now, and the pity and contempt that had been aimed at Nathan had swung all the way around, and it was aimed at the man at the head of the table. But it was Nathan who ended it. Because Nathan had been watching Richard's face during Claire's whole speech, and he'd seen something the board members focused on their spreadsheets, and their scandal had missed. He'd seen the specific particular fear of a man whose worst secret was about to come out. And Nathan, who fixed things for a living, who'd spent his whole life learning to find the one broken part that made everything else fail, understood suddenly that there was one more piece to this. One more thing Richard was afraid of, something bigger than a bribe. Why? Nathan said, and the room quieted, surprised, because they'd forgotten the mechanic could speak. That's what I keep coming back to. Why go to all this trouble, Richard? The spying, the bribing, the cash, the recording, the editing. That's a lot of work and a lot of risk to take control of a company that by your own account you were just going to sell off anyway. He leaned forward. A man doesn't take those kinds of risks to get his hands on something he plans to get rid of. He takes those risks to hide something. So I'll ask you the same way I'd ask a customer whose story doesn't match the noise their engine's making. What are you really so afraid we're going to find, Richard? What's in this company that you need control of it before anybody looks too close? And Richard Whitmore, who had smiled his way through the entire meeting, who had walked in holding what he thought was a winning hand, looked at the auto mechanic across the table, and for one unguarded second before he could stop it, his eyes went wide with pure, undiluted panic. It lasted less than a heartbeat. He recovered fast. He smoothed his tie and said something dismissive about baseless accusations. But everyone in that room had seen it. Catherine Voss had seen it. Claire had seen it. And Nathan had seen it. And he knew with the same certainty he felt when he finally heard the exact sound a failing bearing made that he had just touched the real broken part. The bribe, the spying, all of it was just the surface. There was something underneath. Something Richard had been desperate to bury before anyone with control of the company could go looking. I think, Catherine Voss said slowly into the ringing silence, her eyes fixed on Richard, that before this board votes on anything, we need a full independent audit of every division Richard has had authority over for the past 2 years. She turned to the row of lawyers. Effective immediately. And I want Mr. Whitmore's access to the financial system suspended until it's complete. You can't do that, Richard said, and his voice cracked. I'm a member of this family. I'm a member of this board. You're a member of this board who just got caught billing a bribe to the company, Catherine said coldly. Sit down, Richard. And Richard Whitmore sat down. Because there was nothing else he could do. But Nathan was watching him still, and he saw the way Richard's hand had drifted toward his phone, the way his thumb moved just slightly, and Nathan understood that Richard wasn't beaten. Not yet. A cornered man with something to hide is the most dangerous kind of man there is, and whatever Richard had been protecting, whatever had put that flash of raw panic in his eyes, he wasn't going to let an audit uncover it without a fight. He was already right there at the table, sending a message to someone. Reaching for whatever last desperate move a man makes when the walls close in and the thing he's spent everything to bury is about to see daylight. Nathan didn't know yet what Richard was hiding. Neither did Claire. Neither did the board. But Nathan knew one thing for certain watching Richard's thumb move across that phone under the table. Whatever it was worse than a bribe. It was worse than spying. It was the kind of secret a man burns down the whole world to protect. And they had just told that man out loud in a room full of witnesses that they were coming to find it. The message Richard sent under the table reached a man named Simon Kraft, the head of the Whitmore Group's overseas logistics division. A man whose name meant nothing to Nathan, but which would within 48 hours mean a great deal to everyone in that room. But that was still 2 days away. In the immediate aftermath of the board meeting, all Nathan knew was that Richard Whitmore had walked out of that tower, a suspended man, stripped of his access, his bribe exposed in his own company's books, and that the flash of panic Nathan had seen was still burning behind his eyes when he left. "You saw it too," Nathan said in the car afterward. "That look. When I asked him what he was hiding." "I saw it," Claire said quietly. She was staring out the window, and her hand was in his, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere cold. "Nathan, I've known my uncle my whole life. I've watched him lie to my father's face at Thanksgiving dinner without blinking. I've watched him negotiate people out of their pensions and smile the whole time. In 30 years, I have never once seen him afraid." She turned to look at him. "You made him afraid, in one sentence. And I need to know what you saw that I didn't." "I didn't see anything you didn't see," Nathan said. "I just asked the question that mattered. It's the same as a car, Claire. A customer comes in and tells you his brakes are squealing, and he wants you to fix the squeal, and the squeal's real. But if you only chase the squeal, you miss the thing underneath that's actually about to kill him. Richard wanted us all chasing the squeal. The marriage, the bribe, whether the tape was real. And the whole time, there was something underneath making a much worse noise, and he was praying nobody would listen for it." He shook his head. "A man doesn't fight that hard for a company he's planning to sell. He fights that hard to control what people find when they open the books. Richard doesn't want the Whitmore Group. He wants the audit to never happen." Claire was silent for a long moment, and then she pulled out her phone and made a call, and Nathan listened to her voice go clipped and precise as she gave instructions to someone named Patricia. "I want the audit started tonight, not next week. Independent firm, not our usual people. Richard's had his hands on our usual people for years. And Patricia, I want you to start with overseas logistics, the offshore operations. Every contract, every shipment, every dollar that's left the country under Richard's authority for the past 2 years." A pause. "Yes, I know it's a holiday weekend. Pay them triple. I don't care. Start tonight." She hung up. "Overseas logistics," Nathan said. "Why start there?" "Because that's the division Richard fought hardest to keep control of after my father died," Claire said. "It was the one thing he insisted on back when we were dividing up responsibilities. He said it was too complicated for me, that the international side needed his experience. I let him have it, because I was drowning in everything else, and it seemed like the least important piece." Her jaw tightened. "It's the part of the company nobody watches. The shipments go out, the money comes back. It's all foreign accounts and foreign contracts and foreign law, and it's almost impossible to follow unless you know exactly where to look. If Richard's hiding something, that's where it's buried. It's the one room in the house he's kept the lights off in." Nathan looked at her, and despite everything, he felt a swell of something like pride. Because this was the woman he'd fallen in love with right here. Not the frightened one from the storm, not the cold one from their 2 months of silence. This one. The one who 5 minutes after exposing her uncle in front of the board was already 3 moves ahead, already hunting for the thing underneath the thing. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm my father's daughter," Claire said. And for the first time in a long time, she said it like it was something to be proud of. The audit team worked through the weekend, and Nathan and Claire waited, and it was a strange, suspended kind of waiting. Because in the middle of it, the thing between them kept growing. That first night after the board meeting, they went back to the mansion, and Nathan realized as they climbed the stairs that neither of them had said a word about the pillow wall, and neither of them built it. They just lay down on the same bed together, no barricade, and Claire put her head on his chest, and Nathan lay there in the dark, feeling her breathe, thinking that a year ago he'd been a broke mechanic sleeping alone in his father's empty house, and now here he was, and he'd have signed the whole thing away, the money, the marriage, all of it, just to keep this. Just this. Her breathing. Her weight against him. The simple, impossible fact of not being alone. "Nathan," Claire said in the dark, "can I ask you something? Anything. When Richard's man offered you the 100,000, and your father's garage saved forever, and a fund for Earl and Pete." She was quiet a moment. "Everything you'd ever wanted handed to you for one signature. And it would have all been technically true what he wanted you to sign. Why didn't you take it? And don't give me the speech you gave the board. That was for them. I want the real reason. The one you tell yourself at 3 in the morning. Nathan was quiet for a long time, because she'd asked for the real one, and the real one was harder to say than the speech. Because I knew what it would do to you, he said finally. Not the company, you. I knew that if I signed that paper, if I let a rich man turn what was happening between us into a receipt, I'd be proving the one thing that's haunted you your whole life. That everybody's got a price. That nobody stays. Your mother left. Your father was always gone. Hargrove sold you out for pocket change. Every man who ever proposed to you was really proposing to your bank account. He tightened his arm around her. And I thought, if I'm the one who finally takes the money, then you'll believe it forever. You'll spend the rest of your life certain you were right not to trust anybody. And I couldn't be the one who did that to you. I'd rather lose the garage. I'd rather lose everything my father built than be one more person who taught you that you're not worth staying for. He felt her go still against his chest. And then he felt something warm against his skin, and he realized she was crying silently the way she cried. And he held her and didn't say anything, because some things don't need words. They just need somebody to stay through them. I spent 2 months thinking you were leaving, she whispered. And the whole time you were turning down a fortune to protect a feeling I didn't even know you had. I'm sorry about those 2 months. Stop apologizing. You've apologized enough. She lifted her head and looked at him in the dark. Just don't ever pull away from me like that again. Whatever it is, whatever you're scared of, you tell me. We face it on the same side. That's the deal now. The real one. Not the one on paper. The same side, Nathan agreed. Always. The audit results came back on Monday morning, and they were worse than anyone had imagined. Claire got the call at breakfast, and Nathan watched her face change as she listened, watched the color drain out of it, watched her free hand grip the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. She said almost nothing. Just, yes, and when, and are you certain? And finally, in a voice gone very quiet and very cold. Send me everything and copy the board, and Patricia, don't tell anyone else yet. Not one person. I need to handle how this comes out. She hung up, and she sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. Claire, Nathan said. What is it? What did they find? She looked at him. Richard's overseas logistics division isn't a logistics division, she said. It's a laundry. For the last 2 years, my uncle has been using this company, my father's company, to move money for people you do not want to move money for. Shell shipments, empty containers logged as full, fake contracts with companies that don't exist. Hundreds of millions of dollars cleaned through the Whitmore Group's international accounts and sent back out looking legitimate. She swallowed. That's what he was hiding. That's why he needed control before the year was up. Because the second I inherited fully, or the second anyone did a real audit, it would all come out. He wasn't trying to steal the company to sell it, Nathan. He was trying to steal it to bury it, to keep the lights off in that one room forever. Nathan sat back slowly. The bribe, the spying, the whole thing with the will and the marriage. All of it was just to keep anybody from ever looking in that room. All of it, Claire said. My God, he wasn't fighting me for a fortune. He was fighting me to stay out of prison. She put a hand over her mouth. And the people whose money he's been cleaning. Nathan, those aren't the kind of people who send lawyers. Those are the kind of people who make problems disappear. If this comes out, if their operation gets exposed because of a Whitmore audit, they're going to want to know whose fault it is. And Richard is going to point at me. He's going to tell them I'm the one who dug it up. He's going to make me the problem. And that was when Nathan understood the thing that had been nagging at him since the board meeting, the message Richard had sent under the table, the thumb moving across the phone. Richard hadn't been calling a lawyer. He'd been warning someone. He'd been telling the people whose money he laundered that the operation had been discovered, and pointing them right from the start at the person who'd discovered it. You need to go to the authorities, Nathan said. Now, today, before Richard can spin it. You didn't do any of this, Claire. You're the one who found it. But if you sit on it, if you try to handle it quiet, then you look like part of it. The only way to be safe is to be first. You walk into a federal building today with the whole audit, and you hand it over, and you make it a matter of public record that Claire Whitmore is the one who blew the whistle. Then Richard can point at you all he wants. The record'll show who found it and who buried it. Claire stared at him. You want me to hand the government a case that could destroy my father's company? The company 9,000 people depend on. The company he spent his whole life building. I want you to save it, Nathan said. Claire, that company's already destroyed. It just doesn't know it yet. The rot's already in there. Richard's already turned it into a crime scene. The only question left is whether you're the person who found the rot and cut it out, or the person who found it and covered it back up. One of those saves the 9,000 jobs. The other one puts you in the cell next to Richard. He took her hands. Your father set a test to find out if whoever ran this company had character. This is the real test, not the marriage. This, right now. What you do in the next 12 hours. Because doing the right thing is easy when it's free. I wanted to know what you'd do when it cost you everything. Claire looked at their joined hands, and Nathan watched the war happen on her face, the lifetime of instinct that said, protect the company, protect the family name, keep the lights off in that room, warring against something newer and harder and truer. It'll be a scandal, she said quietly. The Whitmore name. Everything my father built. It'll be in every paper. The stock will crater. We might lose half the workforce anyway just from the fallout. Maybe, Nathan said. Or maybe 9,000 people find out that the woman who runs their company chose to protect them instead of herself. Maybe they find out she looked at a choice between her family's reputation and doing what's right, and she chose right even though it cost her. He squeezed her hands. You told me in the car, whatever happens we walk out together. You said you didn't care about the company anymore. Did you mean it? Or was that just something you say when the company's not actually on the line? Claire looked at him for a long, long moment. And then something in her face settled the same way it had settled in the boardroom, right before she stood up and laid Richard's own books on the table. Get my coat, she said. We're going downtown. They went to the authorities that afternoon together, and Claire handed over the entire audit, every document, every shell contract, every laundered dollar. And she made a formal statement on the record that she had discovered the operation during an independent audit she herself had ordered, and that she was reporting it voluntarily and would cooperate fully. Nathan sat beside her the whole time, and when her voice shook once, describing the moment she realized what her uncle had done, he put his hand on her back and she steadied and she finished. And when it was done, when they walked out of that federal building into the late afternoon, Claire stopped on the steps and just stood there breathing like a person who'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her. I just handed the government a case that might end my family's company, she said. You just handed the government the man who was already ending it, Nathan said. There's a difference. You'll see it soon enough. Richard was arrested 2 days later. The people whose money he'd been laundering, it turned out, had their own problems. Once the federal investigation started pulling threads, and one of the first things that happens when an operation like that comes apart is that everyone starts trying to be the first one to cooperate, and Richard, who had spent his whole life being the smartest man in every room, found out too late that he'd been the most expendable man in a much larger one. Simon Kraft, the logistics head he'd messaged from under the boardroom table, flipped on him within a week. The whole thing unraveled fast the way these things do once the first thread goes. And the strange thing, the thing Nathan had predicted and Claire hadn't believed, was that the Whitmore group didn't collapse. It shook. The stock dropped hard, and there were terrible weeks where it looked like Claire might lose everything after all. But then the story that came out wasn't a story about a corrupt company. It was a story about a young CEO who'd inherited a company with a criminal buried inside it, and who had chosen at enormous personal cost to dig him out and hand him over, rather than protect the family name. It was a story about a woman who'd put 9,000 employees ahead of her own fortune. And that story, it turned out, was worth more than any amount of quiet cover-up. The workers. Nathan had spent months getting to know the ones on the factory floors, the ones like Danny on line 3. They rallied around her. Whitmore Group employees started giving interviews unprompted about the CEO's husband, who fixed their broken machines and cleared their unfair write-ups, and about the CEO herself, who nobody had trusted at first, and who had turned out to be the one person willing to burn her own reputation to do right by them. Customers who'd been ready to flee stayed. New ones came. Because in a world where everybody expected the rich to protect the rich, Claire Whitmore had done the opposite, and people noticed. The board, chastened and grateful, voted unanimously to confirm Claire's full control of the company, will condition or no will condition, criminal uncle safely in custody. Catherine Voss made the motion herself, and when it passed, she came around the table and shook Claire's hand and said quietly, "Your father would be proud, not of the company, of you." And Claire had to turn away for a moment before she could answer. And through all of it, Nathan was there. Not in the boardrooms mostly, that wasn't his world, and never would be, but there at home, at the end of every long and terrible day, waiting with dinner. He'd cooked himself because he'd sent the staff home, waiting to listen, waiting to remind her when the weight got too heavy that she'd done the right thing, and the right thing was worth what it cost. But something had started to weigh on Nathan too in those weeks, and it was a quiet thing, and he didn't talk about it. But Claire, who had learned to read him, now the way he read engines, could feel it building. Because the year was almost up. The contract. The original contract. The one that had started all of this was measured in 12 months, and those 12 months were nearly gone. And with Richard arrested, and the will condition rendered moot, and the company secure, there was no legal reason left for the marriage to continue. There was no board to fool, no Hargrove to perform for, no uncle waiting to pounce on any sign that it wasn't real. The entire scaffolding of reasons that had held them together had been torn down, one piece at a time, until all that was left standing in the middle of the empty lot was the thing itself, the two of them. And the question neither of them had dared to ask out loud, which was whether the thing itself could stand on its own without any of the reasons. Nathan lay awake at night with it. Because he'd told the board he'd fallen in love with his wife, and he'd meant it, and Claire had heard it. But he'd said it in a boardroom, as part of saving her company, and some cold, doubting part of him, the same part that had let the poison in months ago, whispered that maybe she'd heard it as strategy. Maybe now that the crisis was over, now that she didn't need a husband to save anything, she'd hand him the final payment, and thank him for his service, and open the door, and he'd walk back out into his old life, $50,000 richer, and the loneliest he'd ever been. And Claire lay awake with her own version of it. Because she'd been paying this man from the day she met him. And no matter how many times he turned down bigger money, no matter what he'd said in the storm or the boardroom, there was a part of her, the oldest and most wounded part, that couldn't quite believe a person would stay when the money stopped. Her whole life had taught her otherwise. And she was terrified, more terrified than she'd been of Richard, or the audit, or the federal building, to find out whether Nathan Walker was the exception, or whether he was in the end just the most patient version of everyone who'd ever left. Neither of them said any of it. They just lay there night after night on the same side of a bed with no wall down the middle, both of them holding on. Both of them afraid to ask the one question that would decide everything, because as long as they didn't ask it, they could keep pretending they already knew the answer. Until the day the year officially ended. It was a Thursday, the same day of the week they'd gotten married, and Nathan realized it that morning and felt his stomach drop. Claire came home early that evening. She sent the staff away, all of them, and Nathan knew something was coming because Claire only cleared the house when she needed the space to feel something in private. She found him in the kitchen, and she was holding an envelope. Nathan looked at it, and he felt the whole world go very quiet and very still. "The year's over," Claire said. Her voice was careful, controlled, the CEO voice, the one she used when she was terrified underneath and couldn't let it show. "As of today, 12 months. You held up your end. You saved my company, and you saved my father's legacy, and God knows you saved a lot more than that." She held out the envelope. "This is the final payment. Everything I owe you, plus a great deal more, because $50,000 doesn't begin to cover what you actually did." She swallowed. "The contract is complete, Nathan. You're free. You've done everything you agreed to do and more. You can go home." Nathan looked at the envelope in her outstretched hand, and he understood in that moment exactly what she was doing and why. She was offering him the door. Not because she wanted him to walk through it, but because she had to know. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people who stayed as long as she was useful to them and left the moment she wasn't, and she would not spend one more day not knowing which kind of man Nathan Walker was. So she was doing the bravest and most frightening thing she had ever done. She was handing him the money and opening the door and asking him without asking the only question that had ever really mattered. Would he stay if there was nothing left to pay him for? Nathan looked at the envelope, and then he looked at her face, at the careful control of it, at the terror underneath that she thought she was hiding, and wasn't at the woman who had held his hand in a thunderstorm and burned her own reputation to do what was right and could still not quite believe she was worth staying for. And Nathan Walker understood that whatever he did in the next 10 seconds, she would remember for the rest of her life. Nathan looked at the envelope for a long moment, and then very slowly he reached out and took it. He watched something die in Claire's eyes when he did. It was small, and she covered it fast the way she covered everything, but he saw it, the flicker of a woman being proven right about the worst thing she'd ever believed. He'd taken the money. Of course he'd taken the money. They always took the money in the end. But Nathan wasn't finished. He held the envelope in both hands, and then without a word, without breaking her gaze, he tore it in half, and then in half again. And he set the pieces down on the kitchen counter between them, and he pushed them aside like they were nothing, because they were nothing, and he took her hands in his. "I don't want the money, Claire," he said. "I never wanted the money. I took it in the beginning because I had 2 old men counting on me and a garage I couldn't lose, but I have not wanted a dime of yours since the night of that storm, and I want you to hear me say it with my own mouth. No board, no strategy, nobody in the room but us. I don't want to be paid to stay. I want to stay because I can't imagine going. There's a difference, and you of all people should know it, because you've spent your whole life on the wrong side of it." Claire was staring at the torn envelope on the counter. "Nathan, let me finish, please. I've been rehearsing this for a week, and if I stop, I'll lose my nerve." He took a breath. "You handed me that envelope tonight because you needed to know. I understand that. You've had people leaving you since you were 6 years old, and every single one of them stayed exactly as long as you were worth something to them, and not 1 minute longer. So you built a test. You opened the door, and you handed me the money, and you waited to see if I'd walk out, because you'd rather find out now than spend one more day not knowing." His voice roughened. "But here's the thing you got wrong, sweetheart. You think the test was whether I'd take the money. It wasn't. The test was whether I'd stay. And I'm staying. Not for $50,000. Not for a company I don't understand and never wanted. For you. Just you. The tired woman drinking bad coffee in that diner. That's who I'm staying for. That's who I've been staying for this whole time." Claire's careful control cracked straight down the middle. "You don't have to say this," she whispered. "The year's over. There's nothing left to save. You don't have to pretend anymore, Nathan. There's no one watching. There's no reason." "That's exactly my point," Nathan said. "There's no reason, no board, no uncle, no Hargrove, no will, no money. I just tore it up. Every single reason we ever had to be together is gone. All the scaffolding's down. And I'm still here. I'm still holding your hands in your kitchen telling you I love you." He shook his head slowly. "Don't you see? This is the first honest moment we've ever had. Everything before tonight had a reason attached to it. This doesn't. This is just me choosing you, for nothing. For no reason at all, except that you're the person I want to spend my life with. This is the only part that was ever real, and it's the only part I've ever wanted." And Claire Whitmore, who negotiated with monsters and never flinched, who had exposed her own uncle to the federal government, who had walked into that boardroom and dismantled a man's whole scheme without her voice shaking, once stood in her kitchen and started to cry in a way Nathan had never seen. Not the silent tears from the storm, not the quiet grief from the night he'd confessed. This was something breaking open that had been sealed shut for 27 years, something that came up from so deep, it shook her whole body, and Nathan pulled her in and held her while it came, And he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. He just stayed. Which was the whole point. He just stayed. "I don't know how to do this," she said into his chest, her voice muffled and wrecked. "I don't know how to believe someone means it. I've never once in my life been able to believe it. Every time I let myself, I got proven wrong. My mother. My father in his way. Every man who ever said the words. Even you, for 2 months I believed you were leaving, and I was right to. I don't know how to trust that this is real. I want to. God, I want to. But there's a part of me that's just waiting for the moment it turns out to be another lie." Nathan pulled back just far enough to look at her. "Then here's what we're going to do," he said gently. "You don't have to believe it tonight. You don't have to believe it this month. Belief like that for someone who's been hurt the way you've been hurt, it doesn't come from a speech. It comes from time. From somebody showing up and showing up and showing up until one day you look around and realize he never stopped. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep showing up every day. And I'm not going to ask you to believe it before you're ready. I'm just going to make it true over and over for as long as it takes until the part of you that's waiting for me to leave finally gets tired of waiting and goes to sleep." He wiped a tear off her cheek with his thumb. "You don't have to trust me yet, Claire. You just have to let me stay long enough to earn it." She looked at him for a long, long moment, and then she laughed, wet and broken and disbelieving. "You tore up a check for more money than you've made in the last 5 years combined." "I'd tear up 100 of them." "That's insane." "Probably," Nathan agreed. "My father always said I was more stubborn than smart, but he also said the only things worth having are the ones you'd give up everything else to keep. And you're the only thing I've ever met that I'd give up everything to keep. So," he shrugged. "The check didn't stand a chance." There's a thing that happens when a person who's spent their whole life braced for a blow finally realizes the blow isn't coming. It doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like falling because bracing was the only thing holding them up. Claire felt it now, the ground of her whole life shifting under her. All the old certainties. Everyone leaves. No one stays. Love has to be earned and bought and never lasts. All of it cracking and sliding away, and for one terrifying second, she had nothing to stand on at all. And then Nathan's arms were around her, and she understood that he was the ground now. That was the thing she'd never had. Someone to stand on who wouldn't move. "Okay," she said finally into the quiet. "Okay." "Okay what?" "Okay, stay." She looked up at him, and her eyes were red and swollen, and more open than he'd ever seen them. "Stay. Not for the year, not for the company. Just stay. I don't know how to believe it yet, but I want to try. That's the most I've got, Nathan. I can't promise you I'll trust it tomorrow, but I can promise you I want to. That's the bravest thing I know how to say." "That's enough," Nathan said. "That's more than enough. That's everything." The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Because Nathan Walker didn't believe in fairy tales, he believed in the slow, patient work of fixing things that were broken, and a heart as broken as Claire's didn't mend overnight. There were hard days. There were nights she pulled away out of old habit nights. The fear crept back in, and she went cold and distant, and tested him sometimes, without even meaning to, waiting to see if this would be the time he finally left. And every time, Nathan stayed. He didn't get angry. He didn't take it personally. He understood that she wasn't fighting him. She was fighting 27 years of evidence, and evidence like that only gets overturned by newer, better evidence gathered one ordinary day at a time. So he gathered it. He showed up. He kept the garage because it was his father's, and because Earl and Pete were there, and because a man needed his own work that was his and not hers. And he'd drive out there 3 days a week and come home smelling like motor oil. And Claire found to her own astonishment that she loved the smell because it meant he'd come back. He always came back. That was the evidence. Day after day after day. He came back. And slowly the way a rusted bolt finally gives after enough patient pressure, Claire began to believe. She caught herself one morning humming while she made coffee, and she stopped startled because she couldn't remember the last time she'd hummed. She caught herself one afternoon in a brutal board meeting, thinking not about the deal on the table, but about what she and Nathan would cook for dinner. And she realized she was happy in the middle of a workday, for no reason connected to work at all. And that had never once happened to her in her entire life. She caught herself telling Catherine Voss about him. Unprompted, her voice going soft in a way that made the older woman smile knowingly, and Claire didn't even mind that she'd been caught. The company recovered, and then it thrived. Because it turned out that a company run by someone who'd proven they'd protect their workers over their own fortune was a company people wanted to work for and buy from and invest in. The scandal that Claire had feared would destroy the Whitmore name instead became the foundation of something better. She restructured the whole company around the principle Nathan had shown her without ever meaning to teach it, the principle that you take care of the people who take care of you. That a worker on a factory floor is a human being and not a line item. That character isn't what you do when it's free. It's what you do when it costs you everything. She raised wages. She fixed the machines, all of them, not just line 3. She cleared every unfair write-up in the company's history and built a system so it couldn't happen again. And 9,000 people who had once eyed the mechanic's wife with suspicion came to understand that they worked for the best boss any of them had ever had, and they'd gotten her in a roundabout way, because a broke auto mechanic had once looked at her across a diner table and seen a person instead of a fortune. Richard Whitmore was convicted. The full weight of it came down on him, the fraud, the money laundering, the conspiracy. All of it. And he went away for a long time, and the people whose money he'd cleaned went away with him. Claire didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. She'd made her peace with it the day she walked out of that federal building, the day she chose the harder right over the easier wrong. But she did quietly set aside a portion of the company's recovery to make whole the pension funds and the workers Richard had put at risk, and she never publicized it because Nathan had taught her that the best things you do are the ones nobody's watching. And the garage. Nathan's father's garage. The whole thing that had started it all. The debt that had driven Nathan into that diner on the worst afternoon of his life. That garage never closed. Nathan paid off the last of it himself with money he'd earned with his own hands because he'd never touched a cent of Claire's after the storm, and he wasn't about to start. Earl worked there until the day he decided at 74 that he'd finally earned a rest, and Nathan threw him a party that half the town came to. Pete stayed longer because the garage was the only place his grief made sense, and Nathan understood that, and never rushed him, and the two of them worked side by side in comfortable silence for years. Two men who'd been left behind by the world, keeping each other company in the one place that still needed them. One evening about a year after the night he tore up the check, Nathan came home from the garage and found Claire waiting for him in the kitchen, and she had a strange look on her face, nervous and hopeful and terrified all at once. The same look he realized that she'd had the night she handed him the envelope. His heart clenched out of old habit before he remembered that those days were over. "What is it?" he asked. Claire was holding something. Not an envelope this time. A small folder. She set it on the counter, the same counter where he'd torn up her money, and she pushed it toward him with hands that were shaking just slightly. "I had my lawyers draw something up," she said. Nathan felt the old cold feeling try to rise, and he pushed it down. "Claire, we said no more contracts." "It's not a contract." She took a breath. "It's the opposite of a contract. Open it." Nathan opened the folder, and inside was a single document, and it took him a moment to understand what he was looking at, and when he did, his throat closed up completely. It was a will. Claire's will. And she had left him everything. Not because she had to. Not because any court or father or condition required it. But because she'd chosen to freely in the one document a person writes when they're thinking about who they trust with everything they have after they're gone. "My father left me a company on the condition that I be married," Claire said quietly, watching his face. "He turned love into a requirement, and I hated him for it right up until it brought me you. But I always swore that if I ever loved someone, really loved them, I'd never put a condition on it. So there's no condition on this, Nathan. There's no year. There's no test. There's no envelope you have to refuse to prove something. I'm just telling you in the most permanent way I know how, that I trust you with everything I have and everything I am, and I'm not afraid anymore." Her voice broke. "You asked me once to let you stay long enough to earn it. You earned it. You earned it a long time ago. I just needed to be brave enough to say it out loud." Nathan closed the folder, and he set it down. And he crossed the kitchen and took her face in his hands. Hands rough with a lifetime of honest work. And he kissed her, and this time there was nothing careful about it. Nothing performed. No board watching, no theater, no wall of pillows, no reason on earth, except the only one that had ever mattered. "You want to know the difference between your father's will and this one," he said when he pulled back his forehead against hers. "Tell me, his made you get married to keep something. Yours gives everything away to keep someone. That's the whole thing, Claire. That's the difference between the world you grew up in and the one we're building. His world love was a price you paid. Ours, it's the one thing that was never for sale in the first place." He wiped a tear from her cheek. "But I've got to tell you, and I mean this with all the love in my heart. Tear it up." Claire laughed, startled. "What?" "Tear up the will. I don't want your company when you're gone any more than I wanted your money when you were paying me. I don't want anything you have, Claire. I never did. That's the whole reason you could ever trust me in the first place." He grinned. "I just want the tired woman from the diner. For as many years as I can get. Keep your fortune. Give it to the workers. Give it to Pete. Give it to the girl from that ballroom. I don't care. Just give me the mornings. Give me you humming while you make coffee. Give me coming home smelling like motor oil to somebody who's glad I came back. That's the only inheritance I've ever wanted." And Claire Whitmore looked at the man she'd once bought for $50,000, the man who'd refused $100,000, the man who'd torn up her check and now wanted to tear up her will, the man who'd proven over and over in every way a man could prove it, that some things really were beyond any price. And she understood finally, all the way down to the place where the 6-year-old girl still waited alone through thunderstorms, that she was safe. That he was staying. That he'd been staying all along, and would keep staying, not because of any contract or condition or test, but because he'd chosen her freely for nothing, the way she'd never once in her life been chosen. She tore up the will, and she laughed while she did it. Laughed with tears running down her face, and Nathan laughed with her, and the pieces fell to the kitchen floor like confetti, like the last of the scaffolding finally coming down, and underneath it all, standing in the wreckage of every contract and condition and test that had ever tried to define what they were, stood the only thing that had ever been real. Two people, choosing each other. For no reason at all, they stayed married for the rest of their lives. Not because of a will, not because of a company, not because of $50,000, or a wall of pillows, or a ruthless uncle, or a father's dying condition. Those things had brought them to the way a wrong turn sometimes leads you to the only road you were ever meant to be on. But those things didn't keep them together. What kept them together was simpler and stronger than any of it. It was a mechanic who believed everyone deserved a second chance, and a woman who finally got hers. It was a man who fixed broken things for a living, and the one broken thing he fixed that mattered more than all the rest, which was a heart that had been taught it wasn't worth staying for. Nathan Walker had walked into that diner a broke man about to lose everything his father built. He'd walked out with a contract, a fake marriage, and a wall of pillows down the middle of a stranger's bed. And in the end, after the money and the lies and the storms and the truth, he understood that he'd gotten the best deal any man ever made. Because he'd gone looking for a way to save a garage, and instead, he'd found a family. He'd gone looking for $50,000, and instead, he'd found the one thing no amount of money could ever buy. The one thing Richard Whitmore, with all his schemes, never understood, the one thing Claire had spent her whole life believing didn't exist. He'd found someone who stayed, and that, in the end, was worth more than everything the Whitmores ever owned. Because a fortune can be stolen, a company can be sold, a contract can be torn in half and thrown on a kitchen floor. But a man who chooses you when there's nothing left to gain. A man who stays when every reason to leave is handed to him in an envelope, that man is the rarest thing in the whole world. And Claire Whitmore, who once thought love had to be purchased, spent the rest of her days waking up next to the proof that it never did. Some people spend their whole lives searching for something money can't buy. Nathan and Claire stopped searching the day they stopped counting. And they never once for the rest of their long and happy lives together needed a contract to tell them what they already knew. They belonged to each other. Freely, completely, for nothing, and forever. Now that the story has come to its close, let's sit together for a while with what it actually means. Because a story like this isn't just about a mechanic and a millionaire. It's about a question every single one of us carries somewhere in our chest, quietly all our lives. The question of whether we are truly loved for who we are, or only for what we can give. And if you've ever lain awake at night wondering that about someone in your own life, then this story was really about you all along. Think about where Claire Whitmore began. Here was a woman who had everything the world tells us to want. Money, power, a company worth $500 million. And she was underneath all of it, one of the loneliest people you could ever meet. Not because she lacked people around her. Her house was full of staff. Her calendar was full of meetings. Her life was full of men who wanted to marry her. But every single one of those people was doing arithmetic when they looked at her. They saw her fortune before they saw her face. And so she had learned the way we all learn the hard lessons through repetition and pain, that love was just another transaction. That everyone had a price. That people stayed exactly as long as you were useful to them and left the moment you weren't. And here is the tragedy that so many of us understand from our own lives. The more she had, the harder it became to believe that anyone wanted her and not her things. Wealth, which the world tells us, buys happiness, had actually built a wall so high around her heart that no real love could climb it. And then think about Nathan. He began with almost nothing. A failing garage, a mountain of debt, grease under his fingernails, and 2 old men depending on him. By every measure the world uses to judge a man's worth, Nathan Walker was losing. And yet, he possessed the one thing Claire with all her money could not buy at any price. He possessed a heart that could not be bought. That's the great reversal at the center of this whole story, and it's worth stopping to really feel it. The poor man was the rich one, because true wealth was never the number in the bank account. True wealth was being the kind of person who would push $100,000 back across a table and say, "There isn't a number big enough." Nathan had nothing, and he was the richest man in every room he walked into because he owned himself. Nobody could purchase his loyalty, his kindness, or his word. And in the end, that turned out to be the only fortune that mattered. So what is the deep truth this story is trying to hand to us? It's this. Love that can be bought is not love at all. It's rental. It's arrangement. It's transaction dressed up in the costume of affection. Real love, the kind worth building a life on, is the love that shows up when there is nothing left to gain. Remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't when Nathan accepted the $50,000. It wasn't the wedding or the mansion or any of the theater they performed for the world. It was the night of the storm when he took down the wall of pillows and reached across the empty space and said, "You don't have to face every storm alone." There was no money in that gesture. No contract required it. No one was watching to be fooled. It was for the first time completely free. And that is precisely why it was completely real. The love became true in the exact instant it stopped being paid for. There is a lesson here that our whole modern world seems determined to make us forget. We are taught from every direction to measure our worth by what we accumulate. The bigger house, the nicer car, the fuller bank account. We are told that if we can just acquire enough, we will finally be secure, finally be happy, finally be enough. But this story quietly tells us the opposite, and it tells us the truth. The things you can buy are never the things that save you. When the thunder shook that mansion, Claire's fortune was useless to her. Her company could not sit with her in the dark. Her money could not hold her hand. What she needed in her most human and frightened moment was the one thing money has never been able to purchase. She needed someone to stay. And the man who stayed was the one man in her whole life who had never wanted a cent of what she owned. Consider, too, what the story teaches us about trust and about how deep our old wounds can run. Claire could not simply be handed happiness. Even when Nathan tore up that check, even when he stood in her kitchen and told her plainly that he loved her, she could not immediately believe it. 27 years of evidence stood against him. And this is one of the most honest and important things in the whole story, because it tells us the truth about the human heart. Someone who has been hurt again and again does not heal because of one beautiful speech. They heal because someone shows up and shows up and shows up again, day after ordinary day, until the part of them that is braced for abandonment finally slowly learns it can rest. Nathan understood this. He didn't demand that Claire trust him overnight. He said, "You don't have to believe it yet, you just have to let me stay long enough to earn it." And there, right there, is the truest definition of love this story offers. Love is not a feeling that arrives in a single grand moment. Love is a decision you make again every single morning. It is the patient, unglamorous, faithful work of staying. Of coming home, smelling like motor oil, to someone who is glad you came back. Of being for another human being the ground beneath their feet that will not move. And notice what Nathan asked for in the end. When Claire, in the most vulnerable act of her life, left him everything she owned in her will, he told her to tear it up. He didn't want her company. He didn't want her fortune. He said, "Give me the mornings. Give me you humming while you make coffee." That, my friends, is the whole secret laid bare. Because the people who love us for our money or our status or what we can do for them, they are always in the end reaching for the will. And the people who truly love us are reaching for the mornings. They want the ordinary hours, the quiet company, the simple fact of your presence which has no price tag on it at all. If you want to know who really loves you in this life, watch what they reach for. The gift or the giver, the fortune or the person. So let this story leave you with a question worth carrying into your own life, especially for those of us who have lived long enough to know how rare the real thing is. Look around at the people in your life and ask yourself honestly, which of them would stay if the money stopped? Which of them would take down the wall of pillows in the middle of the storm? Which of them is reaching for the mornings and not the will? Because that person, however humble, however ordinary, however lacking in the things the world tells you to want, that person is your true fortune. And if you have found even one such person in your entire life, then you are richer than every Whitmore who ever lived. Richer than any company, any mansion, any bank account. Because you have found the one thing that was never for sale and can never be stolen and only grows the more of it you give away. Nathan Walker went looking for $50,000 to save a garage. And he found the only thing in this world worth more than all the money ever printed. He found someone who chose him for nothing. He found someone who stayed. And in a life full of things that can be bought and sold and lost, that is the one treasure that lasts. Choose the person who reaches for your mornings. Be the person who reaches for someone else's. And you will have understood the one truth that Claire Whitmore spent her whole life learning, and that this story exists to pass on to you. The best things in life were never for sale. They were always only ever given freely. And a love given freely with no price and no condition and no contract is the only kind that lasts forever. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you've lost, or someone you're still hoping to find, do me a favor and leave a comment below, telling me the one thing you believe money can never buy. I read every single one. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of each other out there. And never forget, the richest person in the world is simply the one who has someone that stays.